The NFL offseason is supposed to be a time when teams retool and fans are optimistic about their favorite franchise. But every year, a handful of teams start the season with no outside expectation of success. That's why the media looks silly when every single year one of these teams makes a big splash in the NFL postseason. Of course, last year it was the Houston Texans, who were supposed to be early in their rebuilding process, and this season I think it might be Minshew Mania and the Las Vegas Raiders to shock the league. Last year was another year short of the mark for Vegas, but they did have some interesting developments. Finishing with an 8-9 record obviously isn't the end goal, but the Raiders showed some promise over the back half of the season, winning 3 of their last 4 games, including a bout on the road against the eventual Super Bowl champion Chiefs. The team truly rallied around Antonio Pierce as the interim, and the results were good enough for Raiders management to make him the head coach for the 2024 season. Still though, fans aren't particularly optimistic. A clip recently went viral of a young Raiders fan saying confidently that the Raiders will not be winning the Super Bowl, and when asked about what would make a successful season, he quickly replied, "Staying out of jail." So yeah, the bar isn't especially high for the Raiders this season, but those low expectations could be exactly why the Raiders surprised so many people. One of the many reasons for hope in Las Vegas is the player they selected with their 13th overall pick in the draft. That's Brock Bowers. It's rare that you can draft a proven, talented player such as Bowers past pick 10, which is why general manager Tom Telesco pounced on the opportunity despite having used a high draft pick on fellow tight end Michael Mayer in 2023. Tight ends notably don't progress quickly in the NFL, but Brock Bowers is not a regular tight end, and he has the potential to become a huge difference maker in the passing game in his rookie season. In 3 years at Georgia, Bowers tallied over 2,700 yards and 31 touchdowns, helping lead the Dogs to back-to-back championships in 2021 and 2022. At 6'4", 230 pounds, he possesses speed that is unreal for his size, even running a 4.49 40-yard dash, and is renowned for playing his best in the big games. Along with his speed, he's a very fluid athlete and a natural pass catcher who can easily take advantage of zone mismatches against linebackers and safeties. Aside from Bowers, the Raiders beefed up their O-line, signing Cody Whitehair as a left guard, Andres Pete as a high-end backup tackle, and drafting Jackson Powers Johnson in the second round. They also brought in Dylan Loeb with their 4th round pick, who is an intriguing rookie to sit behind Zamir White, who still has a lot to prove, but also a tremendous upside. Of course, Davante Adams is the first option in this offense and will command heavy attention from opposing defenses. Depending upon how fast Bowers grows accustomed to the NFL, he could be in for a long big year as the second best receiving option on this team. A 1,000-yard rookie campaign wouldn't be shocking. And this is exactly why I don't really get the hate for this offense. Adams is one of the best wideouts in the league at almost 32 years old, and Jacoby Myers is a super underrated and more than serviceable wide receiver too, racking up 800 plus yards and 8 touchdowns last season. Now they have one of the most talented tight end rooms in the league with Bowers and Mayer, and an O-line that will probably end up around league average, and a running game that should be at least interesting to say the least. Sure, their depth at wide receiver isn't amazing, with Trey Tucker and Jalen Guyton as the current wide receivers 4 and 5 on the depth chart, but this team will be running a lot of 22 personnel and split back formations with 2 tight ends and 2 running backs in the backfield. I think it's pretty obvious that their offense should be expected to improve this season, thanks to several key roster improvements in Antonio Pierce's simple but effective game plan. The real reason why most people are doubting the scoring capabilities of this team is Gardner Minshew, but here's why they're wrong. Gardner Minshew is still one of the most underrated, overhated quarterbacks in the NFL, and I will die on that hill. To put in perspective how good Minshew has actually been at the NFL level, let's compare some stats to that of NFL fans are bullishly supportive of, and who just got paid $275 million to Trevor Lawrence. In their careers, Minshew has played 49 games to Trevor's 50, and although he's thrown for fewer total passing yards, he's thrown 59 touchdowns to Lawrence's 58, and far fewer interceptions with 24 picks to T-Law's 39. It's true that Lawrence has thrown for about 1,700 more yards in his career, but he's also seeing a lot more passing attempts per game, and it's actually Minshew with a slightly higher yards per completion. I'm not saying this that Minshew is necessarily better than Lawrence at all, because I don't think that will be true, but he certainly isn't a bad quarterback by any means. Now, with what's probably the best supporting cast he's had to work with in his entire career, Minshew has an opportunity to cement himself a long-term starter somewhere else, possibly, similar to what Kirk Cousins did in Minnesota, even if he isn't a true difference maker at the position. Minshew can win games for the Raiders right now, and will be a perfect bridge quarterback if Vegas wants to bring a younger guy in the next season. The Raiders probably aren't trying to win a Super Bowl this year, so for a team that's really just trying to make some noise and potentially earn a playoff spot, Gardner Minshew can certainly do that. Just last season, he led the Indianapolis Colts, who I would argue have a similarly talented, if not worse roster than the Raiders, to a winning record, and nearly won the division title. Until proven otherwise, the AFC West is the Chiefs' division, but Minshew can give them a great chance at a wild card spot and add significant appeal to a team trying to make up the swing and a miss on Jimmy G. We've talked about the offense, but I also want to talk about the defense as well, which I think is the strong suit of the Raiders roster. Last season, Vegas fielded a top 10 defense in points allowed per game with 19.5 on average, and really picked up down the stretch with Antonio Pierce taking over as head coach. Now, with Antonio Pierce back, the Raiders have made several additions that are going to make this defense even better in 2024. Before we get to that though, let's talk about, of course, Maxx Crosby. You can go on and on about the gaudy stats he's been posting in his regular season, and he's had a career year in 2023 with 14.5 sacks, but sometimes it's the little off-season anecdotes that show truly how good a player is. A report coming from training camp early in August is that they were going to have to pull Maxx Crosby from the practice field so the offense could actually run reps. He is so game-breaking that the opposite side of the ball can't even practice with him on the field. Having a guy like that on your team is invaluable and improves every aspect of the offense, and the defense for that matter. So, now that the Raiders have added Christian Wilkins, they're going to be a force up front, maybe even one of the best D-lines in the league. The back end of the defense isn't quite as talented as the front, but Trevon Moehrig and Marcus Epps make for a hard-hitting safety duo, and Jack Jones is one of the more underrated corners in the league. He graded out very well last year according to PFF, earning a 72 coverage grade, and was one of the most effective corners at run defense across the entire league. However, there are more significant question marks over the cornerback 2 spot and beyond. That's certainly a weakness of this defense, but with a pass rush like the Raiders have, it's going to be difficult for opposing quarterbacks to get deep into their progressions in order to take advantage of it. And another player worth a mention is Robert Spillane, who served as the green dot player for the defense as a middle linebacker and was routinely making plays in his 2-interception defensive player rated the performance against the Green Bay Packers. There's only so much you can do to evaluate the defense on paper, but I think the X factor for the Raiders, outside of Crosby, is Antonio Pierce. The change after Pierce took over as head coach is impossible to overlook. Previously, the Raiders had allowed 23 points per game, as they allowed only 16, which would have been the fewest in the league over a full season by far. The Raiders transformed from an undisciplined mess under Josh McDaniels to a respectable football team, finishing with the fewest penalties of any team in the NFL. During Pierce's stretch as the head coach and play caller, the Raiders have had the third most sacks, fifth best turnover margin, embodying the fundamentals-oriented play style that he used to become a Super Bowl champion as a player. And now I know it's cliche to say, but this unit truly was greater than the sum of its parts with Pierce at the helm. Not only did they scheme better, but they just seemed more energized, like they actually believed in themselves as a team. And for a team that was trying to play catch in the standings all year, the Raiders brought the heat late, rallying to beat the Chiefs in Week 12 and essentially posterizing the Chargers in a Week 15 primetime matchup. The Jack Jones pick six was one of the best things I've ever seen, by the way. As I said earlier, this division isn't exactly wide open, and it will never be as long as Patrick Mahomes plays for the Kansas City Chiefs. Still, that doesn't mean the Raiders can't be in the conversation and be the second best team in this division. The Chargers have some potential, no doubt, but it may take some time for LA to implement Jim Harbaugh's vision, especially since there is a notable lack of talent on offense. And Denver is kind of a hot mess after releasing Russ in the offseason and straight up taking $85 million in dead cap. Bo Nix has looked good, but again, that's not really a team that's looking to win right now. Call me crazy, but I definitely don't think the Chiefs have the best weapons in the NFL. And with Kelsey going into age 34 season, the potential issues with Rashee Rice, I'd certainly favor the Chiefs to win the division, but I think the Raiders have a shot to steal one of their 2 division matchups this season, which would benefit a ton in the wildcard race. With that being said, I think the absolute ceiling for Vegas is 10 wins, but I could see them even going lower than 7 either. I think realistically, this may be able to grab 9 wins this year, with a good enough for a division record that could eventually earn them a wildcard spot, which would be a great outcome for Pierce and company. To wrap up, it seems clear that the Raiders are one of the most underrated teams in football, and really are an average NFL roster with some above average upside. The long-term plan for this Raiders roster isn't super clear unless Minshew has an incredible season and locks down an extensive future seasons. But even if that isn't the case, the roster is built to sustain decent success in the short term, has a solid foundation to build around the next great quarterback to don the silver and black. And yes, I know they lost week 1 to the Chargers, but the upside is still there, and we'll see how it plays out the rest of the year.